That is not a hot economy for ordinary Americans. The economy is not booming when half of Americans 55 years of age and older have no idea how they will live out the last years of their lives with dignity because they have no retirement savings. And that includes, unbelievably, 20% of seniors trying to survive on incomes of less than $14,000 a year. And I just don't know how anybody, certainly not a senior citizen, survives on $14,000 a year.
Juan Guaido is sitting there saying that he's the legitimate president of Venezuela because of the Constitution and democracy. Now, this all comes from Article 233 of the Constitution of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela, the 1999 Constitution. And it says that when there's an absolute vacuum of power, meaning nobody's in power, there's nothing going on, no leadership, an absolute vacuum of power occurs in these following circumstances. The president dies. The president resigns. The Supreme Court impeaches the president. If there's permanent physical or mental incapacity certified by a medical expert designated by the Supreme Court and approved by the National Assembly, or the abandonment of post declared by the National Assembly or recall by popular referendum. So they can get a new president in there if the people vote them out. If the National Assembly votes to have a abandonment of post, they declare that. And the Supreme Court and the National Assembly approve of the president not having permanent physical or mental capabilities, if he's impeached by the Supreme Court, if he resigns, or if he dies. So essentially 5 of 6 of those are just non-starters whatsoever, right? Just the abandonment of post declared by the National Assembly is the only one that we're going to focus on. But just, 5 out of 6, right? Death, resignation, these are big-time events. Now, what Juan Guaido is sitting there saying, because if the National Assembly declares an abandonment of post, then there's a secession of power. Somebody gets power, but it's not the leader of the National Assembly. So he sits there and says, because Nicolas Maduro didn't do the election right or something, therefore he abandoned the post. Now, Article 236 outlines in detail the duties of the president, which include everything from conducting international relations and leading the armed forces to granting pardons and convoking referendum. So the opposition may not like Maduro for a variety of reasons, but you can tell, look at the Twitter feed, look at him doing all the marches and all the rallies. He has not abandoned his presidential functions. There is no power vacuum. There is no abandonment of post. So this is all a bunch of bullshit. So they don't, they might not like him, but he's definitely still, presidenting. He's still presidenting.
No one has benefited more from our thriving economy than women, who have filled 58% of the newly created jobs last year. You weren't supposed to do that.
Now, Article 233 specifies that clearly in an absolute power vacuum, then there's several ways that it has to happen in the first 4 years of the 6-year term. And so those 5 or 6 ways: he dies, he resigns, he's impeached by the Supreme Court, he's recalled, National Assembly declares an abandonment of post. Then the president shall be succeeded by the vice president. It doesn't go to Juan Guaido. The National Assembly can declare an abandonment of post, which he hasn't abandoned his post. He's still right there. But even if the president did abandon his post, it wouldn't be Juan Guaido. It would go to the vice president. When Hugo Chavez died, then the vice president took over. And then there has to be within 30 days, there's an election that's called. So Juan Guaido, he calls himself the president, but he hasn't called for elections in 30 days. So then the vice president is sworn in, and then he finishes the mandate. So only in the case of a power vacuum occurring between the presidential elections and the president-elect's inauguration will the president of the National Assembly temporarily take office. So there's presidential elections, and then when they get into office, right, so November is when we vote for our president. He takes office in January. That's when the National Assembly runs things. That's when the National Assembly, the interim president of the National Assembly, temporarily takes office. So who would be the president if, Maduro abandoned his post, which he didn't? It'd be the Vice President, Delcy Rodriguez. Delcy Rodriguez, if we're listening to the Constitution, if we're listening to the rule of law, if we care, if we give a goddamn about democracy and freedom and fairness, Constitution, this is constitutional law. This is where all the laws spring from. So you're going to sit there and say Article 233 allows him to coup d'etat his own government? Not only has he not called for elections in 30 days, but Juan Guaido says that he gets to remain in power for 12 months. So he's taken power for a year. He's taken power for a year. He's not calling for elections in 30 days. He's saying he is the president. That goes against the Constitution. You have to really bend a lot of shit in order to warp your mind around this shit to think it's constitutional. This is not constitutional. By Venezuela's own laws, this is not constitutional. So whose laws are we listening to? We're just making them up, right? They took Chevron's oil fields, so we're going to help take their oil fields for Chevron. If the Venezuela private companies came in here and took our oil fields, how would you like that?
$1 in size, up $4 trillion in the last 10 years alone. We can easily afford $1,000 per adult per month. This is the great equalizer of our time. Economic justice is social justice. There is no social justice without leveling the playing field in terms of how much money we get as Americans to be able to pay for our basic needs.
So, Juan Guaido has no constitutional, no legitimate, he's not listening to the rule of law, he's not the democratic leader, he's nothing, he's nobody, he's a puppet for the, Jan Führer. So Article 233 of the Venezuelan Constitution does not permit Juan Guaido to be the goddamn president. Mitch McConnell's not the president. He was only elected by the Senate to be the president amongst the Senate, just like Juan Guaido is elected president of the National Assembly. That's their Congress. Not to mention everything else that's going on. So far, the U.S. government has stolen $7 billion. The U.S. government has stolen $7 billion, 3 Cigna refineries, Valero, gold, money, cash. We're going to send a Trojan horse of humanitarian aid, right, because we care about humanitarian aid, but we don't allow Palestine to get any humanitarian aid. There's already been a cache of weapons that was found at the border. The president has already given a kill order. So these are all declarations of war. You've already lined up the troops along the border. You've already issued a kill order to the Colombia Mafia and the government. And you've stolen $7 billion worth of goods, worth of machines and factories, oil refineries, everything that's in the United States. And then that money was going to be given to Juan Guaido. But Juan Guaido goes to Venezuela to give speeches, and now he's not allowed to leave the country. Not under house arrest. He's going around the city making speeches. But he's not allowed to leave the country, and all of his bank assets have been frozen. So the idea was to steal that $7 billion and then give it to Juan Guaido, and then he could take that money and lead the civil war. And he's talking about bloodshed, and he's talking about there is a civil war brewing. That's essentially what, the United States would love for that to happen. Juan Guaido just to take it over himself. So there's blockade, humanitarian aid can't get in, but it's bullshit, it's a Trojan horse, right? Because humanitarian aid can't get into Palestine, even though we control Israel. We give them $4 billion. I think it gives us some influence.
United, unbreakable, united by this bond of love for each other and love for our country. It is this principle of service above self that is at the heart of every soldier, at the heart of every service member. And it is in this spirit that today I announce my candidacy for President of the United States of America.
What else has happened? So there's 500 Russian troops now. 500 Russian troops are in there. Russia and Venezuela's made a deal for gold and oil. They tried to do some gold and oil deal with the United Arab Emirates, and then Marco Rubio threatened them because apparently a congressman or a senator could just threaten like they're the president. So he threatened the United Arab Emirates that they will receive sanctions if they allow the gold and oil deal to go through. Russia and Venezuela's made a deal, and ultimately, this could go anyways, right? They could have special forces, and then they get Maduro out, and then they install Guaido, and then everybody is happy. That seems very unlikely. 86% of Venezuelan people are opposed to military intervention. 80% of the Venezuelan people didn't even know who Juan Guaido was until he rose to international stardom. So how are you going to foist upon a president, right, that's not even supposed to be the vice president, is supposed to be the president, not the leader of the unicameral legislative branch?
Growing up, my family went back and forth between lower middle class and working class. Yet even when they came home weary and bone-tired, my parents found a way to show us all who we could be.
So this could go in many ways, right? We could do special forces, quick extraction, just like in Guatemala or Chile, just eliminate their leader, install a military dictatorship, make their economy scream, take the oil fields. All the oil companies are already lined up, and they are straight up being brazen about it. They're saying they're going to take the oil, and the Venezuela is saying, you're going to take our oil. And so everybody's on the same page. It's about them being a socialist country, and they're rich in oil, the #1 oil fields in the entire world. So, we could be successful, right? We could extract them and then install our fascist puppet and then get military in there to just have fascist capitalist domination for decades. In this world, in the internet generation, information generation, I just don't see it happening. Everybody knows what's going on. It's straight up, coup d'etat, slow motion coup d'etat or attempted coup d'etat. And just, reverse the roles. But what could happen, right? Anything could happen, but let's just use some common sense. There's Russians already in there, so if we invade and kill Russians, well, now Russia's got a pretense to go ahead and, get some nuclear weapons and a bunch of air force and a bunch of shit into Venezuela. In fact, Venezuela, the people, the Maduro, probably should be trying to jockey, either nuclear weapons or some better weapons, because I think our military probably could take them, just if we invaded a full-out ground force. So that's a possibility. We send our special teams into Venezuela. They fuck up like the Bay of Pigs, and they get slaughtered. Now we have to defend our troops, right? We don't want them to die in vain, even though we had started that war. We had initiated with our aggression. So there's millions of possibilities, but I think the idea of Venezuela possibly getting a nuclear weapon or getting an ally that has a nuclear weapon for the people of Venezuela if we invade or coup d'etat, for there to be retribution against the United States. Definitely the embassy in Venezuela is probably going to get torn up, but we're just, south of the border. This is the same continent. So if we declare war on our own continent, we're inviting China and Russia to get a foothold into this, hemisphere. And that's horrible. We don't want that to happen. It's a Cold War right now, right, with the stealing of $7 billion, the kill order, lining the troops up. They threatened 5,000 troops to Colombia. So this is a Cold War. They've already taken, stuff. They've already threatened, and they also are moving into military positions. So this is, at the very least, it's a Cold War, because you're stealing other people's stuff. This is international crimes. So at the very least, it's a Cold War, and it could turn into a a world war, a nuclear world war. World War III would be fought with nukes, and World War IV would be fought with sticks and stones. So, do you want to risk that, American people? Do you want to risk your lives and the lives of your children for the oil companies to steal Venezuela's oil under false pretenses of lying, just like they did in Vietnam and Iraq and Syria and Afghanistan? Didn't we already get Bin Laden? Well, what are we doing? So, so this is all a bunch of, Venezuelan coup d'etat is a bunch of fucking bullshit. It's setting up another clash with superpowers which have nuclear weapons. If Venezuela doesn't get a nuclear weapon, they could get invaded, but that we're showing the entire world that if you have a nuclear weapon, like North Korea would be your best friend. But if you don't have a nuclear weapon, then we're going to overthrow you, especially if you got a shit ton of oil sitting underneath you. So this is just bad lessons. We're teaching the entire world this is what you got to do in order to protect yourself. Get a nuke or get a nuclear power to back you. This ain't going to be good. I think this will be one of the worst blunders, worst fuck-ups we've ever seen. We fucked up in Libya, fucked up in Iraq, fucked up in Somalia, fucked up in Niger. And now these clowns, you want these fucking goofballs to run a war? Just right there? Just south of the border? I see a lot more bad things happening than good coming out of all this horse shit.
But our union is also in a state of rebellion, yearning for an America and a world that works for all of us. So I want to first salute some of those leading the charge for the nation we deserve. The teachers striking across the country to save public education, the immigrants demanding justice at the border and beyond, the federal workers who ended the abusive shutdown with a strike threat, the felons who won their voting rights back, the students, valve turners, pipeline resistors, and all those who are standing up, sitting in, and locking down for a livable future.